build out. So there's a lot of different reasons why we might get into phases on doing something like this, but the big thing on this is to understand that all of these are different points in time. So what I mean by that is when I click on this first phase and I start thinking of like as original stuff, it's a point in time. So the first phase, it might be your original 1970s construction building with the green shag carpet and the gold blue speckled countertops and all of that stuff. This might be our beautiful 1970s construction. So for me, when I usually get into phasing and I start talking about a project, I name the phases accordingly. So my template, it says like phase 1, phase 2, similar description like this, but for me, I might come in and say original construction. Then I can come in here and in my description say the 1970 shag carpeted building. This is what was built in 1970. Then I come in here and start getting into the phasing and saying, well, okay, this is going to be our remodel, our addition, whatever you want to do this, and this could be our 2014 build out, right? So we're remodeling this in 2014. So the big thing is kind of start laying the framework for what points in time are you trying to represent inside of your phases. So when we talk about that, you've got your remodel, you've got your points in time. If you had 2014 build out, and then you're going to come in here, and there's going to be another part of this, which is going to be the addition. And this is really going to happen. I didn't spell that right, but you get it. The 2050 add-in to the building, whatever. You go through and you start setting the phases up accordingly. So you got your phase 1, your phase 2, your phase 3. Name them how you want, but I always try to stay away from new and existing, and you'll see why here in a little bit that I do that. So I've got this set up, I've got these phases in here, and what you're going to start to see about everything in Revit is going to have a phase to it. So every object you model, every view you look at has what are called phases. So if I just say okay to this and I start looking at the view down here in my properties, in my view properties it actually is going to say what phase do you want this view set to. Do you want it to be the original construction? Do you want it to be the remodel? Do you want it to be the addition? What view, what phase is this view going to be representing? So if I jump into that very simple sample building I had sitting here, you're going to see that this was a little training file I pulled out from a few years ago. But there's this nice little training file where this is a project. We've got all this existing stuff. And one of the new things is going to be to tear out this walls, open this up, it looks like, and then tear out this wall as well. So it's like, how are we going to go in and remodel this? So if we go back to the phases and we start looking how phases are here set up, it's just called phase 1, phase 2, right? This is kind of based out of how I always have my template set up. Could be existing or core and shell. So if this project was truly happening, I'd say this was existing. And then in this case, this is just a remodel. And you can put the year you're remodeling it if it helps with you, etc. So we're just going through and setting phase 1 up, defining what phase 2 is on this scenario. So when I start looking at this, you're going to see now that I have all these different floor plans. I've got a first floor, I've got a demo, I've got an existing, and I've got a new. So if I come down here to my existing floor plan, here's what that building looked like existing. Right? So here's I think this was a bank, theoretically some small little bank. Then I can come over here to my demo view and I can see that, oh, we're going to be demoing out this wall, this wall, this wall over here, and it looks like we're going to be putting a door in here, demoing out this door, which probably means we're going to need to infill it. And then odds are if I'm demoing this out, I'm hoping I'm putting some other space up here, but I might not be. I might just be putting a big window in there. And so when I go look at new construction, now I can come in here and see here's my new construction view, and here's what's happening. Now, how this all got accomplished was simply using those phases set up in each view. So if I start looking at the properties of my view and I scroll down, you're going to see that this property was set to this view. It's set to be phase 2. Right? So this is my remodel or addition, whatever you wanted to call it, inside of this view. If I go back to my existing view, it's set up to be displaying phase 1. So its phase is phase 1. The new construction is phase 2. And here's the point that I see a lot of people in my mind make a mistake in here, is if I go to the demo view, there's no demo phase, right? Because if we're talking that this bank was originally built in 1970, and we're remodeling or adding on to this bank today, did you demo it out in 1980 and leave the bank open to, exposed elements for 20 years? No, during this construction or during this point in time, we blew out those walls. So I think that's where a lot of people start to make it a little bit more cumbersome in the fact that they go in and start saying, hey, I'm going to add a demo phase in there. Now, I'm not saying that you won't always need a demo phase. One of my clients actually was remodeling a prison, and there was actually a point in time where the prison got the, I think that the politically correct term is the residents of the prison, or the inmates. I don't think politically correct is inmates anymore. They got the residents to go in and demo out the interior portion of this prison. So there truly was a point in time before the contractor came on board where the residents came in and demoed out this part of the prison. Then the contractor came on board, and we called it the resident demo, and then we had a phase of remodel. When the contractor came in, demoed some of the exterior walls, did what they needed to do for their project. So in that case, there truly was a specific point in time that demo happened. I did have a demo phase. I've been using phasing in Revit for over 10 years, and I've only ever had to use it on 3 separate projects. So I've only ever had that demo phase on 3 projects. For the most part, this is what's said. So how Revit then is displaying the objects appropriately, if you start looking at your phases, there's then what in Revit is called a phase filter. So out of the box, you've got these built-in phase filters. And what these phase filters are talking about is how am I displaying all of these different objects, okay? So the phase filter is what's graphically overriding stuff created in previous phases, new phases, etc., etc., etc. So to understand the phase filters, we first have to understand what's happening with elements in Revit. So elements in Revit, every element can have different properties associated to it. So if I come over here and I'm going to select one of these walls, or one of these, I'm going to grab one of the walls that are actually being demoed out. So if I select a wall, every element in Revit is going to have a phase created. So if I come in here and look at this wall was created in phase 1. In this case, that's our existing or original construction phase. And then this object's being demoed out during our remodel construction. So if I come over here and look at a wall that's not being demoed, again, it was still created in phase 1. However, there's no phase demolished on this. This is existing. It's going to remain. I'm not going to be demoing that object out in any way, shape, or form. If I go to my new construction view and I start looking at these new walls are saying they're created in phase 2, and yet they're not being demolished. So when you start looking at these options, they're going to have a phase created and a phase demolished property. So when we start doing that and looking at this in conjunction with thinking about phases, we go to phases here. So we start looking at that in conjunction with the phases, that's where the graphic override starts coming into play. Now every element can pick up different reasons on what these are going to be. So I can have an object that's existing as well as new, existing as well as demolished, or new as well as demolished, and they're all going to be able to pick up on this depending on what phase the view is set to and what they're set to if not be demolished in. So what I always like to talk about is an object that is new. So an object that is new in Revit means simply it was created in the current phase. And this is the part that I don't like, why I don't like people calling it existing phase and new phase. Because everything created in my 1970s shag building, it was new in 1970s. That shag was groovy. We had the shag rake. It was all cool and new in 1970. So any object that in Revit, it's going to be considered new if it was created in the phase that the view is currently set to. So if I come back to this existing view and I start looking at this object, this is in Revit's mind considered a new wall. I'm in a phase 1 view. My view is set to be phase 1. My objects are all set to be created in phase 1. Therefore, these objects are new to phase 1. So this is where a lot of people get confused, like, oh, I want to go show new stuff. So they're in existing, like, I want to show existing stuff. Well, no, it was new shag in 1970. So for those of you who are young and you don't know what shag carpet is and you haven't experienced it, I apologize. You missed a great point in time. But so that's a new object. Now, if I look at this same wall and I go to my new view, I should have called this my remodel view, but if I come here and look at this, this object was still created in phase 1. But in the Revit world, you may notice it's gray, because since it was created in phase 1, but my view is set to display, or my view is set to phase 2, Revit is now considering this existing. So this is something that was created in a previous phase to the phase I'm in. So if I had phase 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, an object created in phase 1 is existing in 2, 3, 4, and 5. An object created in phase 3 is only existing in phase 4 and 5. So it's any object that was created in a previous phase gets the graphic override or gets the definition of existing. Now a demolished object is an object that was created in a previous phase but demolished in the current phase. So if we come over here and start looking at our demo wall, our demo view, and I grab any one of these objects, it was created in phase 1 but demolished in phase 2, which according to my view is the current phase. So created in a previous phase, demolished or being demoed in the current phase. So that's what in the Revit world it's considering a demolished object. Now the fourth object in Revit is to say there's a temporary object. So when you start talking about a temporary object is an object that was created and demolished in the same phase. So if we're thinking about this and this was truly a bank, we probably don't want all the customers to be able to see all this construction. It's not going to happen in a weekend. So I might come up here to my new phase view, say I'm going to go in here and draw in a wall. So I'm just going to go architecture, model a wall. I'm going to come down, just use a generic simple thing, and I'm going to come in here and say, okay, I'm putting a wall from here to here. Right? Actually, that's probably going to be wrong because if I go to my demo view, I'd probably put it back in the middle of this. Well, I'll show you this here in a second. But if I go back to that new and say, okay, this wall was created in phase 2, and it's also getting demoed at the end of phase 2. This is what Revit is considering a temporary object. So an object created in the current view, but displayed in and demoed in the current view is going to be considered what Revit considers a temporary object. Like I told you, I put that in the wrong place, so I'm going to nudge it over a little bit so we can be a little bit, get it out of the doorway. There we go. So this is an object. You see Revit's taking care of this graphically. So we've got demoed object, existing objects, new objects that are now halftone, and temporary. So Revit takes care of all of that for us just by simply going in and setting that up.
Brian John asks, does it matter to say previous phase, or is it that it is created in any other phase?
It's created in any prior phase. So the one thing that Revit lacks in phasing is it does not understand future. So I can't, in my existing floor plan, display these objects out here as dashed and say future addition. Revit does not understand future. It's only current and previous. So that's why I say it was created or demoed in a previous phase, because it's anything rather than the current phase. So previous is why I say it that way. It doesn't understand future. Only reason why I would not use any for that scenario. Okay, so with that said, you now understand we've got the phases, and we have what's called the graphic overrides. Now, if you're starting to wonder, I'm going to go 3D to show this. If you're starting to wonder, well, how is this red? How is this blue? How is Revit picking up on this stuff to be gray, this stuff to be this? If we go back to phases and we start looking at the graphic overrides, this is what's controlling the looks of these objects between demo, existing, current, etc., etc. So we come in here and we start looking at this. What we're saying is if this object is going to be considered as existing, or at any point in time what Revit considers it existing, how do you want to display that? So you can see it's going to come in here and take those projection lines. I've down to a Langlade of 2, a light slide solar gray, and I've told them all to be solid lines. I didn't say if it was a dashed line originally, convert it to be a thin solid line. This is just, I believe, the out-of-the-box settings. So this is what it's coming through and saying, hey, how am I going to see the existing projection lines? How am I going to see the existing cut lines? What's going to happen inside of here? And then also, you can tell Revit to use a material. So out of the box, Revit truly is being used as material. So it's coming here and saying phase existing. So existing stuff, notice how the brick disappears on this wall. This wall I believe is a brick wall. Since I'm using the material of existing, existing doesn't have any hatch patterns on it. So this material, when we start to look at it, there's no surface pattern, there's no cut patterns, no hatch patterns are being used on this material, so therefore it's removing surface patterns, etc. So any object using this material is going to display this way. The same thing is true for demolished, new, temporary, etc. It's all these different phases. Phase material. So if you wondered why is this one red, this one blue, it's because the demo phase says, hey, let's make it transparent in red. The temporary phase says, hey, let's make it transparent in blue, so if you're viewing it in a 3D object. So that's what controls the overrides, or that's what gives you the graphic display of the overrides. But what really happens when you get inside of here is if you look at phase filters. So the phase filters are really getting into play at, okay, how are we going to display new objects? How are we going to display existing, demolished, temporary, etc.? So the phase filters is looking back to the graphic overrides. So if I come in here and say graphic overrides, when I'm looking at a new object, do I want to display it as by category, so don't change the look of it all? Do I want to override it, looking to the graphics override tab, or do I want to say not displayed? So this is what really starts to happen inside of here with the by category, the override. So when you start looking at phase filters, these can only be applied to views. This is how it's taking care of seeing the stuff dashed, etc., seeing the stuff grayed out, seeing all of these different information. So we go back to a view, and I'm going to go to a floor plan. I can come down here and say, well, what phase filter do I want to see inside of here? And this is why I said it gets confusing to people. If I go to my first floor existing plan, get the right view here in a second, you might notice that it can say show all. But if I actually go in here and say show new, it looks exactly the same, because in 1970, it was all new. There was no previous phase. Well, there was. It was dirt. But there was no previous elements here. There was nothing in there. So if I come into existing phase and say show new, people get confused. They're like, wait, why is this new? What's going on? This is an existing object. Because in Revit, it was new in 1970. I should have modeled shag carpet in here and rendered it out. That would have been funny. So then I can come into the same view. Because my view is set to phase 1, if I go say show previous phase, everything disappears, with the exception of the rooms, and we'll get to that in a little bit. So everything disappears because the previous phase was dirt. Right? In 1970, this used to be a grass field that cows grazed in. I'm making this up as I go. So this was a dirt field. So a lot of people come in here and say, well, why am I going to say show previous? It's existing. No, it was new in 1970. So understanding that, this is where you start going through and duplicating views. So if I go to my floor plan demo, I only wanted to see demoed objects. So my floor plan is set to phase 2, and it's saying show the previous and demo phase, or phase filter. So if I go back to my phases and I look at the graph, the phase filters, the show previous and demo says don't display anything new, override the existing stuff per the graphic override tabs, override the demolished stuff per the graphic override tabs, but don't display anything temporary. So in here it's saying don't display temporary or new and override existing and demolished. So that's what all of these different phase filters are doing. If I go to the same view and say, ooh, I wanted to show previous and new, well, now it's going to show pre-stuff as grayscales because it's being overwritten, and new stuff as solid lines. So we've got this all set up looking at this, but what if I wanted to show like demo and new? Well, that's what you saw on the other one, but there's no previous stuff on here. Here's all my demoed stuff. I guess I'm demoing out the toilet and the sink too, which I didn't realize. Here's my demoed stuff. But why is the new stuff not showing? Well, because the new stuff, it's set to phase 2, or it did show the new stuff. Why is the existing stuff not showing? Well, because I didn't say show existing. If you say show all is going to show previous, existing, new, as well as temporary. So a question came up, are these all out-of-the-box filters? Yes, they are. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit, which will answer Chris's question here in a second. But so when we start looking at this, that's how you can get this. And a lot of people come up to me and say, well, there's no show previous, new, and demo. Well, yeah, that's called the show all, unless you didn't want to see temporary. So with that said, if there's a phase that you wanted to have, a phase filter you wanted to have in here, I want to show previous, I want to show new, and I want to show demo, but I don't want to display temporary. You can create a new phase filter. So I'm going to create a new phase filter. I'm going to stick with the same naming convention. So I'm going to say show previous. I'm going to say plus. I personally hate the plus symbol, but new plus demo. So I'm going to show previous, new, and demo. So how do I want to see the new stuff? I want it by category. How do I want to see existing? I want to override it. I want to override demolish, but I do not want to see temporary. So show previous, new, and demo. Now I can come back to this view, grab my show previous, new, and demo, and boom, the temporary object disappeared. So it's understanding that Revit's taking all of that into consideration for you as long as you're using those phase filters. Now, I know I have a lot of people who come in and say, well, that's great, but I like all the existing stuff just to be solid gray. I don't want to see if it's built up with this or built up with that or et cetera, et cetera. So if you don't like the way these graphics are set up, again, going back into my phases, I can go to the graphics override and say, you know what, for existing stuff, I want to take all of the hatch patterns and I want to make them a light shade of gray, and I want to make them all just be a solid fill. I say okay, I say okay. Did I miss that? What did I do? I should have all my existing stuff. Yeah, it should still be working. What did I miss? What did I miss? Phases, graphic overrides, existing. I must not have hit OK. Solid fill, visible. Oh, make them visible. I missed that checkbox. I knew I missed something. So make it visible to start with, and then a solid fill gray. We say OK, and there's all my existing walls. So it's whatever you want to be dealing with, however you as a firm, a company, want to be seeing all of this. It's going through and playing with those phases and those phase filters. Now, with that said, there's a whole lot of things that you need to be aware of that are nuances of this. So you're going to notice that I have this fill in here. I went in and put a new wall inside of this opening. You'll see that I tore this door, I demoed this door, and I put this new door in. So we start looking at objects. Revit, when there's an object being placed into an existing, so if I put a door, a window, a curtain wall inside of an existing, Revit's going to automatically come and do what's called an infill panel, and it's going to say, hey, this was a basic wall. I'm going to infill that with a new wall. You will notice that on infill objects, there is no phase created or phase demolished property because it's being infilled to the existing wall. I can tab and select it and change it to be something else. I can change that to be a different wall, but there is not a phase option. I forget what that was. I'll just undo because I don't remember what it was. There is not a phase option for objects that are being considered an infill panel. So if you demo out a door, Revit's got to fill it in. It's assuming you want to fill it in with the exact same type of object that was there. So infill panels are really the only thing model-wise in Revit that you really don't get a phase to. Now, other things. Grids are not phaseable. So if I wanted to come out here and add a new grid for this little remodel addition, I'm just going to throw a grid in here. It's probably not going to line up. This grid is not phaseable. I don't know why grids aren't phaseable. I think they kind of assume that if you go back to your existing view, you're just going to set the crop region to be short and you're not going to see it. So with that said, grids are not phase dependent. So personally, there's a lot of different ways to do this. You can create different grid types. I personally create grid types in a filter. So for me, I usually in Revit go edit the type, duplicate it. I have one called grid new. I'll take this one, edit the type, duplicate it, and call it existing. Or I did these backwards, but you'll get the point. Probably spelled that wrong too. So I personally go in and create different grid types, and then I use filters to filter those out. So that's kind of one of those things when you get into it. These are not phase dependent. Grids aren't. So the other thing about this, when we are looking at this stuff, let's say you demoed a wall or a door or an object, or how do you demo the door or the wall or the object? If I want to come in here and demo this wall as well, it's two ways to do this. One of the ways is to pick up a sledgehammer and beat the wall down. No, that wasn't sarcasm. Actually, in your, I always forget where this tool is because I never use it. Phasing. In your Modify tab, there is this little sledgehammer that you can go grab. You can grab the sledgehammer, hit the wall, and boom, that wall has now been demolished. I wish you could do like a little swinging action, get some fun and frustration worked out. But when you grab that object, it doesn't matter if that's a door, a wall, a window. When you grab the little demo thing, it's going to go through and demo that out for you. Notice how the phase filters automatically changed it for me? Everything started happening. What if you come back and change your mind? Well, it's just changing the phase demolish property. That's all the sledgehammer did, is it demolished it to whatever your current use phase was. So I could come back here and say, oh no, that's actually not going to be demolished. Neither is this door. It's just changing the properties for the phase demolished on these objects to what phase they're going to be put in and demolished. So you still have the capability scenario to go through and set that up. Now, a lot of times people will ask me as well, what happens if I wanted to put it, not demo the door, but swap the door out for a different type of door or window or whatever you're talking about. So in that case, you still demo the original door. Then maybe we're going to want not a single hollow metal door. We'll go find a different door. Great, that's the one I have loaded. Sweet. We're going to go in with maybe a bigger door or possibly, yeah, we'll go with a bigger door. A bigger door, and this one's going to be inset. Terrible example. What you're going to then do is host this door on the infill wall. Now, trying to get this to line up exactly is a royal pain. I usually just place it, get it where I somewhat need it to be, and then I come back and use the align command and align this edge of that door to the edge of that door. Right? My door happens to have a little bit wider of an opening than the old door because it's an inset jamb. So it's even coming back and demoing that panel, that infill panel, and then saying in Revit, oh, you know what, I need to actually cut this open a little bit wider for this door type. And if I went back and looked at this in my 3D view, it's probably showing that there's going to need to be a little bit of demo above that because I'm notching into it with a taller door. So if I were to take that same new door, phase 2, well, is that where I did it, or did I do it over here? Anyway, if I were to take that new door and say it's like a 9-foot tall, it would actually tell Revit, hey, you've got to be demoing up here as well. So you've got to put that door into the infill wall to get it set up. So that's kind of how you go through and set that up. And again, the weird part is you're like, oh, if I come back and take this door and change it to not be demoed, oh, no, there's no demo there, Revit really kind of starts to freak out because now you have a door on the door, and it lets you do this. So I haven't figured that out. You do have to go back and delete it, which should have removed that door in my opinion, because when I set that up, the infill panel went away, which is what that door was hosted on, so the door should have went away too. But it's also, just to let you know, kind of a weird nuance thing. If you ever needed to show like hotel doors and place them, I've actually had a client do this. I thought it was crazy. They demoed all the doors, placed another door in the exact same spot, and then went and said this door is no longer demoed and put them all on the same phase, and it all worked. I personally thought that was a little bit weird, so now you can see I've got a bypass door or something. But yeah, funny, somebody commented on that. Hey, great way to do motel joining room doors. Yeah, it's possible. I would never do that, but I would create a door family that did it for me.
Or if you're the architect at the Winchester house, then you have all these odd things going on.
So the other theory on this too is, what if I wanted to, like in this case over here, and I don't know if this one was set, I did. So like this case over here, I wanted to blow through this part of the wall. Well, what I see most people do in a scenario like this is go split the wall. And there's nothing wrong with this. You can do it this way if this is how you want to do it. So they go to the modify command, they go grab split, they're going to split a portion of this wall out, and then they go back and grab that portion and say, hey, this portion is going to be demolished in phase 2. Maybe. So phase 2, right? I personally don't do that because I don't like having 3 separate walls here. If I come back in my existing and say, oh, this wall was not going to be a generic 8-inch but a generic 12-inch, now there are 3 separate walls and I've got to make sure I'm doing what's correct there. What I do, and I'm going to undo all of that, what I like to do is place an opening in here. And when I say opening, I'm not talking the wall opening command. If you go to the architecture tab, there is this wall opening command. I personally don't like this because wall openings cannot be faced. So I don't ever use the wall opening command. For me, I've created a component, do a save as on the door family, delete everything out of it, you now have an opening component, and switch it from a door to be like a generic model. So I have an opening command here that I can place my opening. And the reason I use the opening is I can select that opening, which is on the edge, and still have the same phase filters, phase properties. So maybe I'm going to say that was created in phase 1, but demoed it. No, actually, I lied. That was still going to be created in phase 2. So just by saying it's created in phase 2, Revit understands I need to demo that out. If I go back to the existing and look at that same area, you can see there's a little opening there, but, and actually I'm grabbing the infill wall, so you can see Revit's kind of breaking it up, but it still is going to look fine on the infill. And since it's all one object, if I come in here and change this to be a generic 12-inch wall, everything updates with it. So that's why I'm not a big fan of doing the whole wall opening. I truly use an opening command. Somebody came out and said, what if it was a cased opening? Exactly the same thing, just have an opening that has casing on it and put that opening there. So I was just kind of assuming in this case, looking back at this view, I used the opening to blow through this wall for my addition. So I used an opening right here just to blow through the whole wall for the addition into this bank. So I used it for a blow through. You can use it for just a drywall opening, or you can have a case type opening if you're looking at that as well. So a lot of different options if you're doing it. And that would be the same thing for roofs, floors, etc. If I'm going to put a hole in a floor because I'm putting an elevator in this, or I'm moving the stair or whatever, I'm going to blow through that with a floor opening or a roof opening to do the exact same thing because I can phase those openings. If I go back and do a shaft or a vertical door or vertical opening, etc., opening by face, those don't have phases on them, so it's never going to allow me to say, hey, this looks like demo, etc. Okay, so getting into a lot of that stuff, that's how we deal with the phasing, that's how we set it up, those are things going on. Now I talked about grids not being phasable. The other thing that is not phasable in Revit are also rooms. So if I thought I had rooms on in this view, but wait, yeah. So if I start, oh, this is a new construction, that's my demo. Let me go back to my existing. So if I start looking at this, you're going to see that I have all of these rooms in these views, including rooms in here and here. Well, the reason rooms are not phasable is in phase 1, I'm demoing out, phase 2, whatever you want to call it, I'm demoing out this wall and this door, making this a single floor or single room. So rooms don't have phase demo. They have the phase they were created in, but they do not have a phase demo. So what ends up happening is when I go to my new construction or my demo, whatever, there is now rooms placed only in the new rooms. There's not a room here. There's not a room there. There's not a rooms over here. Well, I guess I did demo out the bathroom and make it storage. But there's no rooms over here. I don't have a restroom, you know, men's and women's. So I got rid of this restroom, but so these rooms are then placed in areas I'm demoing them. Okay? So the big question then always starts to come up, well, that's great, but then how do I display the existing rooms? And there's a blog post on my blog about this if you don't catch this during this webcast. But notice how I have a view. This view is set to show, phase 1, and it says show everything. But if I go to visibility graphics in this view, the only thing I am displaying in the model categories, well, because none of this is modeled, but the only thing that's modeled I'm displaying, usually the only thing I have on here are rooms. All I want to see are rooms, and the only annotation category symbol I want to see are room tags. So theoretically, I probably should have come down here and say, let me see room tags and rooms. Then I only tag the rooms that I want to see on a new construction view, right? So there's still this room and this room sitting here that I'm demoing out. I'm just not going to tag them. So I set up a view that says existing names only. I have all those existing names, and then when I go back to my sheet and I open up my sheet, there's technically 2 views on this sheet. Here's my first floor plan new. I then go grab my existing name only's view. Revit will line it up for me. Place it. Get rid of the view title, which I thought I had in here. No title. Tell it I don't want to see a view title. And boom, I now have existing rooms and new rooms. I want the existing rooms to look gray, so I go back to that existing rooms view, go to my visibility graphics, and say, hey, I want to take all of those room tags and I want to halftone them. So now I have halftone room tags, so on my sheet, all my existing rooms look like they're existing rooms. So that's one of the nuances in Revit. I don't go regenerate all of these rooms in a new construction. I just set a view up. That view is set to the previous phase, and only thing visible in that are rooms and room tags, and I only tag the appropriate rooms. So that's a question that usually comes up in those scenarios is how do we go through and set that up, etc. Okay? Now, one of the key things inside of here is when we're dealing with consultants. So for the architects, mostly in the room, and the engineers, you might want to listen to the structural engineers, Revit MEP has a lot of difficulties using phasing. So phasing for Revit MEP, when you start talking systems, you have to cap a system before you can demo a portion out of it. you try to add new portions to it. So I'll let you guys discuss this with your Revit MEP people, but if you're doing a project that's using phasing, and you're going to be doing phasing, understand that it is difficult for the mechanical side and the plumbing side to tap into existing things and to go through and do those calculations. So make sure you sit down with your mechanical engineers and say, okay, we're going to do phasing. Here's what we were thinking. Let's talk this through so we can make sure we're going through and see what's going on in there as well.
And I believe, and I hope I'm not misspeaking, but I'm pretty sure that we did one of these, Tony and I did one of these about a year or last late winter or spring sometime on using phasing tools in an MEP environment. So you might want to go check our archives if you're interested in that. Maybe that would be a good topic for a new webinar.
Yeah, and there's a lot of posts online, different blog posts, etc., talking about the issues that MEP can have with phasing, etc. So just understand that you have that going on, and that is a thing. And I'm not going to get too involved on this. I know the MEP side has talked about it in different ways around it, but it does become difficult for it. And depending on your mechanical plumbing engineer, they might be really good at knowing how to deal with it. I've worked with other mechanical engineers. They really didn't understand it. So they just added comments to every duct accessory, every duct connector of new, demo, phase 1, phase 2, whatever it was. And we actually had to work around to go on using view filters to display it the way we wanted to. It was kind of a pain, but it did end up working for that particular mechanical client. So just who you're working for, etc., is really look into that and see what's going on with that. So I think that really gets into it. So the other thing I talked about with grids, if you did then end up having, like, I want to come back here and I got to, let's go to the new floor. So I do want to fix this. I did say these ones want to be existing, and then this one wants to be a new grid. And I'm going to go ahead and draw one more grid roughly in here somewhere. We're going to say this is that outside building, right? I'm not worried about naming. I'm not worried about all of this. So here's my grid. So this is my two, I'm going to make these my two new grids, and these are the existing grids. And if you have grids in a scenario like this, you may choose not to run it all the way through. That's completely up to you. But what I do in scenarios like this is now I don't want to see these grids. So for me, I've created view filters for grids that are new and grids that are existing, etc., etc., etc. So when I come in here and say I'm going to do a new filter, I'm going to call this grid new. I'm going to go say this is part of grids. And I'm going to filter it by the type name. We'll just say equals new. So once I get a filter created inside of here, I can then go into my visibility graphics, probably set this up in a view template, come down here, add my new grids, and say let's go turn off all of those grids that are new. So that's how I personally deal with grids. I have new grids, existing grids are completely different types. Some of my clients even go make existing grids half-toned, so they then add another filter for existing grids, and then you can go through and half-tone the existing grids when you're in a new grid type construction. So since grids aren't phasable, think about using view filters to get those set up for you. Now, the other thing about this is if you are using filters on something like this, talk to your structural engineer. If you're going to be displaying their grids, you might need to do something on that with the structural consultant for those things as well. Then the other thing is if I decided I do not like the way these phase filters are named, and I come in here and start renaming these, or in my case I created a new one, if your consultant's phase filters do not match your phase filter names, they do not work through linked models. So if I go through and set this up, I've got to make sure that my phase filters match my linked phase, my linked clients, so my structural clients, my mechanical clients, all of those people. I've got to make sure that mine are going to match their phase naming. So if I call mine Fred and they call theirs Wilma, I'm not going to see what's going on through a phase object inside of there. So just be cautious of that. Make sure your phase filters match in name. The other thing about that is if your phases themselves do not match in name, then you're going to have to do a little bit of manual input inside of here. So I'm going to go ahead and just, I have another version of this. I'm going to go ahead and link in this file. Sure, whatever. Oh crap, it's upgrading it. So I'm going to go ahead and link in a file inside of here. And the reason I'm linking in a file is if your phase names match, Revit does a really good job of matching the phase names automatically most of the time for you. If their phase names don't match, there's going to be a little step that you have to go through to get the phases to match, and it's what's called phase mapping. So if I'm getting files from my structural engineer, I'm getting files from my mechanical, or vice versa, if you're a structural engineer and you're getting files from the architect or mechanical, all of the different people inside of there, what needs to happen is we need to do what's called phase mapping. Should have thought about this and opened up a different project, but it'll go through and get done. So what I'm going to do once this gets loaded is I'm going to select the linked model and go into my type properties. When I hit edit type, that's going to allow me to go into exactly what's called phase mapping and be able to say, hey, their phase 1 matches my phase 1. That's confusing as heck. They're slightly in different locations, but that's okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this linked model, I think. There we go. I'm going to select my linked model. I'm going to go into my type properties. Now in my type properties, I want to check the phase mapping. Here's their phase, here's my phase 1, and notice since the names didn't match, this one mapped it to new construction. Well, no, they're using existing for that. Here's my phase 2, and I want to map it to their new construction. So you need to go through and start making sure you're mapping the files. Now, if you have 2 phases and the consultant has 9 phases, Revit's only going to allow you to map to a phase later than the previous mapping. So I can't map this one to new construction and then map this one to existing. Once you choose a phase, that phase, any phase after that has to be a phase in the linked model after it as well. So I can't map my phase 2 to their phase 1 and their phase 1 to my phase 1 to their phase 2. So once you use new construction up here, I have to be a sequential phase in theirs after that.
What we're trying to do, there's several questions on the screen here, I realize, but I know that a lot of them are going to get answered in the context of the presentation. So what we'll do is we'll save a few of them, and when we get to the end, if we haven't answered them, we'll go back and get them for you. I think we're picking up most.
Some of you guys are asking the questions before I get there, so
yeah, that's essentially what I'm saying. Is that I know it's coming.
Okay, so that's what it's all set up, and this is kind of something that even if I think our phases match, I just still start coming through here and doing this, because what you're going to see is now that I've done that, notice how in this view the entire model disappeared. I'm going to go back to my 3D view. So this is that other file over here, right? So I've got this linked model. I'm just going to move it off to the side. Maybe. Let's just move it over here. I don't think it's pinned. So you can see inside of here, I'll go turn a section box on because all of the stuff in this is probably on a lower level. Oh, a little bit more. So in this case, I'm at phase 2 and I'm saying show all. I guess that one didn't have any phasing inside of it. So I thought it did, it didn't. So you can see in this one, if I go back to phase 1, I don't think there's anything in that model. So that model didn't have anything existing. So I'm at phase 1, there's nothing in that model. They didn't care about any of the existing stuff. They're only modeling the new stuff. So just by simply mapping that, you can kind of see what's going on type of scenario, and there you go. So I think that's the nuances of file linking, phase mapping. I think that's kind of the big thing on that one. Trying to think if that was it on that. I think that's it there. We talked about phasing on rooms. We talked about opening. So the last thing I want to show you with on this too, and this is actually courtesy, God, I should have closed the existing file down. This kind of gets into starting to show you what's going on in view. Oh, that was the other thing I want to show you with phases. So like here's phase 1, here's phase 2. These objects were created in nice little mapped file here of depending on what you set the phase to. So if I go set this phase to be phase 4, notice how all of the phase 4 would show all. I'm seeing temporary stuff, new stuff. If I go back and say no filter, I'm seeing everything that was created. So you've got different ways, and this is courtesy of my wife, just to kind of start showing you mapping of what's going on. So here's that same wall. It's created in phase 1, demoed in phase 1. created in phase 1, demoed in phase 2, et cetera, going down. So just by looking at the different phase filters, I suggest you do something like this if you really want to, so you can start seeing like, oh, hey, phase 4, this is previous phase stuff. You can see how it works through all of that. So play with this a little bit when you're going through and setting something up like that. Now, the other thing in here, too, as well, is you might have noticed, I don't know if anybody did notice, that if I go to my new construction, I'm going to delete this link model out of here. If I go to my new construction view, anybody notice something different between new construction and existing, or between existing and demo? One of the things I want to talk about are views. So notice how in my demo view or my new construction view, these elevations are there. But if I go to my existing view, those elevation markers are not there. If I come in here to my existing view and decide I'm going to go cut a section, probably would have been nice if I made that straight. Let's try that one more time. If I come in here and decide I'm going to go cut a section through this building, and I'm in the existing phase, and I go to the new phase construction, that section mark isn't there. I'm not doing any magic. What you'll see is in the properties of this section, it's set to be phase 1. Revit is automatically setting up, hey, if you're in phase 1, you only want to see phase 1 sections. I don't want to see a new construction section. I don't want to see an existing construction section. Same thing is true as if I go create an elevation. If I come into my View tab and I go create an elevation, and I point that elevation at this wall, I go to New Construction, I don't have that elevation sitting there. So even your elevation views in Revit are taking into consideration what's going on. Now, the reason they're doing that is when you're in a view, when you create other views, modeled objects, they automatically pick up on what the phase and possibly phase filter is. So if I go model a new wall inside of this view, this new wall said, hey, you're in phase 1 view. I'm going to take that wall and automatically generate it in phase 1. You're in phase 1 view. I'm going to take that section and automatically generate that section in phase 1 and pick up on what your view filter was, your phase filter was, for that as well. So Revit takes all of that into consideration. I'm not seeing the expansion of the building. I'm not seeing, the demo of this stuff going through the wall simply because all of your phases are also phase dependent. So that's kind of a nice feature. One other nuance, do I have any in here? I do not. Another nuance that does kind of stink in Revit is when you start looking at reflected ceiling plans. Sure. When you place the ceiling in, and I'm in a phase 1 view here, so I'm going to go place the ceiling in here. Ceiling, we'll grab a 2x4 or 2x2 ceiling. We'll place a couple ceilings in here, right? So I come in here and I place these ceilings. Well, if I grab this ceiling and decide that this ceiling needs to be demoed in phase 2, and I go change my filter to be phase 2, and I change my phase filter to say show previous, new, and demo, that ceiling doesn't necessarily look demoed. So it is demoing the ceiling, but the problem is it's demoing the lines at the perimeter. It doesn't demo out the hatch patterns. So this is another nuance for the architects online here, is the fact that ceilings get demoed, but they only get demoed on their perimeter. So that really doesn't work in my mind. So this is the last nuance that I'll have with phasing, is the fact that usually what's going to happen is you're going to have to override graphics in view. Gotta grab the whole ceiling on this element, and you're going to have to either go change the surface pattern of this ceiling, and what's going to happen, and I don't think I have one inside of here, is you're going to have some sort of dash ceiling tile, etc. The other problem with overriding elements in view on this is the fact that it only gives you drafting hatch patterns. No, it's giving me model. So you'll have to go in here and create one, like diagonal, crosshatch, whatever, to say, hey, this is now a demoed ceiling. So that's kind of the theory when you're looking at this, is ceilings. Also going to be some sort of nuance. You're going to have to create a filter to change the display on those. I personally have a ceiling type built into my template called 2x4 demo and 2x2 demo, and basically this line is dashed as opposed to being solid. That's how I take care of it, and I just model in a demo ceiling when I get inside of there. So kind of one of those different nuances when you're getting inside of there when you look at that as well. So with that said, I think I hit all the topics I wanted to, so we're going to go over any questions I may have missed. So one of the questions is, where do you draw the line on complex phasing with like existing demo, new, mixed with design options? I don't. I use phasing as it's intended as phasing. I currently have a project right now where there's physically 9 construction phases, and so in the project there are 9, well 10 because we have existing in this case. So there's 9 remodel phases plus the original construction. So we go through and there's, you know, one project, we actually had 9 different Revit buildings. It was like the 1920 construction on this museum, the 1940 construction, the 1960 construction. So literally I have a 1940, a 1960, a 1970, a 1977, and there are 8 phases for all of the existing buildings. I wanted, for my client and us, we wanted to be able to keep in context with our brain which part of the building was built in what phase, which helped us know the construction. So before we even started phasing for remodel, there was 8 phases for existing buildings. So it kind of sounds crazy, but that's in our mind how it ended up working and going through in our thing. So for me, if I'm dealing with phasing, I just keep dealing with phasing. But yes, once you throw design options in Garfield, it really becomes confusing in what you're dealing with there.
All right. Can a phase be called future parentheses NIC?
You can call a phase whatever you want to call it. You call it Fred, Wilma, Barney, and Pebbles. It doesn't matter what you call it, but you're not going to ever be able to display something from a future phase. There's tons of different workarounds. I've seen people then model walls outside of here and demo them in each phase and made them temporary objects as phasing. I've seen people just draw model lines for future. You can call it whatever you want to call it, but Revit doesn't care what it's called and how it's going to display it. There's no way to display future objects.
Brian, I think we got to Chris's question there.
Yep.
And John and Garfield's next 2 questions we covered. Coming down to the next question Garfield had, how do you demo part of a roof?
That would be the same thing. I think I caught that one just like I did the wall opening, and wherever I did the wall opening, I just have an opening that I use that's roof-based or ceiling-based, or in my case the opening is face-based, and I just put that in, stretch it, and set it to a phase to be demoed.
And then similar to a similar question, how do you demo part of a brick veneer on an existing wall?
That actually we didn't talk about. So you could do same thing. So one of the families, I think I have, I don't know if it's loaded inside of here. Let's just go see. I have something very similar as well. Is I have a family that's not all the way through the wall, so it's not an opening. It's a void family. Void family. I got to go browse to this, and it's probably a couple releases old. I haven't upgraded anything for a while. Then I got to, so I have this one called, it's just basically a recess. So if I wanted to go ahead and remove like just the brick in a project, and I'll do this from 3D, it'll make more sense. And I'll go change this to be phase 2. So if I were to come over here in this existing building, actually we'll leave this phase 1 for a second. And all those are all existing. So those, we'll switch this to be a brick wall. There we go. Beautiful, it's a brick wall now. So of course the brick wall is backwards. So what I do is I place this component that I've just loaded, and this component, when I place it, can have a panel or not have a panel. I'll turn the panel off. And then I can just go say, you know, my depth is going to be 3 5/8 of an inch. So my depth on this is just cutting in 3 5/8 of an inch. And then I can grab that opening, hopefully. Filter, generic model. So I can grab this opening and then just say, hey, this opening was going to be created in phase 2. So nothing really looks like it's going on here. I can see it's there. But if I then go say, hey, I want to see phase 2, I can see that that brick's being demoed out. So that's one way to do this. If you need to pull out just portion of an area. The other way to do this is if you take an object like this, I'm going to convert a different wall to brick since that one's already been jacked with. We'll just go say brick in here as well, or CMU, whatever. And I'm going to go back and say this wall, we're going to go back to phase 1 view properties real quick. So in phase 1, I've got this nice CMU on metal stud, so yeah, we'll just leave the CMU out here. What you can do is take a wall, and if you've never used parts before, you can actually part out a wall. And if you're parting out a wall, it becomes a little bit difficult, but this is another way to do it. You can then grab the parts, and if you grab a part, you can go into the part, and I got to remember how to do this. Phase created by original. No, I want to change the phase of this to say, no, this is being demoed in phase 2. So now when I start looking at this part, and I go back to phase 2, it's showing that just the CMU, of course the structure of this wall, but just the outside portion of this wall is being demoed. Now, with that said, if you're doing that and I go back to a floor plan and I start looking at my plan views, it's not going to show that portion of the wall being demoed unless I go tell Revit I want to see parts visibility. I have to say I want to show the parts in order to see the demos portion on that come up as well. So if you part out objects, we've done a webcast on parts. There's tons of Google resources on parts. Go Google parts, but that would be the other way to say, hey, I'm demoing this portion of the wall. The third way would be to simply model 2 separate walls in the existing phase. So model a CMU wall, model a brick wall, model whatever it is, and then just demo out that portion you modeled. That's the other way of doing it. So depending on how you want to do it, a void form, a void family that takes out part of it, parting it out, or going and modeling separate walls. One of those 3 solutions.
All right, so we're at just a little after 4 o'clock. We got a couple questions left. Brian, do you see any that we haven't touched on? New tenant?
Rick asked, is the opening family I use different than the opening family out of the box? Out of the box opening family actually gives you casing, which I think is crazy. And then if you I really wanted to, my family, so it's a little bit different, actually gives me the capability to add like a header line on either side of it as well. So a lot of times I want to show there's a bulkhead above, I can show it, or if it's truly like a gypsum, like drywall opening, I like to be able to see it. Mine also gives me the capability, if I had like brick or something and I wanted to wrap it around, for that to happen as well. So it's slight nuances, but yes, the opening RFA family for structural engineers would work, but for architects, I believe there's actually casing on it.
All right, and
so Rick says there's one without casing, then feel free to use the one without casing.
let's see, I'm not sure if you ever really mentioned this or not. When I'm doing a remodel addition tenant finish, I automatically start my project by duplicating all of my floor plans and set the phase to phase 1 or existing, or whatever you have named it.
Yeah, and I didn't talk about that either. I absolutely do the same thing. So when I'm in a project, there's usually working views, phase 1 working, phase 2 working, phase 3 working, etc. Because then if you're modeling in that view, it automatically picks up on the phase. And then the other thing that brought into my head is, I don't know if everybody knows you can actually create a view list. Yeah. This got upgraded to 2015, so let me go change my appearance real quick. Let's do 330 seconds, 330 seconds, and 330
That or
seconds.
figure out the wingdings.
Yeah, you do that or get your secret decoder ring out. So one of the things that on views that you can actually do for fields is one of the views you can add are phases and phase filters. So for me, a lot of times if I get in a project with phase, I always add phase and phase filters, so I can start coming over here and saying, wow, what is my phase? What are my phase filters doing? And it makes life in my brain easier to keep things sorted and looking at as well. So for me, love the fact that I have phase and phase filters in a view schedule, and I check those things all the time.
Ryan, thank you very much for all the great webinars you do. This will be recorded, hopefully be up, it has been recorded, and hopefully it'll be posted in a few days once Denny gets it post-processed and everything's ready to go. And let's see, hopefully we'll see you at Rhombus next week if you're in the Denver area next Tuesday. It'll be at Swinnerton Builders this time, and AU after the first of...
Right after Thanksgiving.
Right after Thanksgiving. And then I believe there's a Rhombus BobTech holiday get-together.
We haven't decided if it's going to be joint yet. We're still
time.
taking a survey on that because we can't decide if the Denver people are going to want to drive halfway to Boulder or if the Boulder people are going to want to drive halfway to Denver.
So we'll meet y'all in Niwot.
We're hoping it'll all be centered somewhere like 120th, I-25, somewhere on the Boulder Turnpike. We can't decide. So we're kind of hoping that people will do it, but we sent a vote out. So if you guys are members of Bombas, Bombtech or Rhombus, please go look on the meetup site and tell us if you wouldn't mind driving or not.
So with that, we will close, and thank you very much, and talk to you next time.
Thanks, everyone.